"You're even stingier than you used to be, Mom." That was how my son chose to speak to me loud enough for the entire private dining room to hear, confident enough to believe there would be no consequences. The words didn't come alone. They came with a smile, a scoff, and a room full of people who suddenly found the tablecloths very interesting. "My name is Margaret King. I am 68 years old. I am a widow. I am a mother. And I am the woman who built the company my son now introduces as his own. The problem I'm facing isn't just disrespect. It's betrayal, slow, calculated, and performed in public like entertainment." That night was my grandson Sammy's 10th birthday. Jason had insisted on hosting it at an exclusive private club in Boston, the kind of place where the chairs are heavier than most people's monthly rent. I arrived early, as I always do, carrying a small gift bag and a tin of homemade lemon loaf wrapped carefully in wax paper. It was Sammy's favorite. It always had been. When it was time for gifts, Sammy bounced in his chair with that sweet, hopeful energy only a child still untouched by cruelty can have. I handed him the envelope first, a navy blue sleeve holding a savings bond, along with a handwritten card. Before Sammy could even open it, Jason snatched it out of his hands. "Let's see what Grandma brought," he said, lifting it high above his head like a trophy. He laughed, a sharp, practiced laugh that drew everyone's attention. "Place your bets. I'm guessing socks. Or coupons." I stood there, frozen, my smile stiffening. Jason tore the envelope open and glanced at the bond, his face twisted into exaggerated disappointment. "Oh, wow," he said loudly. "A bond. How exciting. Nothing says happy birthday like a piece of paper that matures in 15 years. Engraded." A few people laughed. Not because it was funny, but because Jason was the CEO, and laughing kept them safe. He held it up again, shaking it slightly. "You see this, Mom?" he said. "This is cheap. Embarrassingly cheap." Then he dropped it. Not gently, not accidentally. He let it fall to the floor beside my chair, where it landed near my worn leather shoes. Something inside my chest cracked, not loudly, but deeply. I had been insulted before, dismissed, talked over. But this was different. This was my son, mocking not just a gift, but the values I tried to pass down. And he was enjoying it. Before I could bend down to pick it up, my daughter-in-law Valerie stood abruptly. "Oh, Margaret, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice dripping with false concern. She tipped her wine glass. The red liquid spilled directly onto my hair, my shoulder, soaking into my blouse and trickling down my neck. The room gasped. Valerie froze for half a second, long enough for me to see the satisfaction flicker in her eyes, then she covered her mouth. "How clumsy of me," she said. "I didn't even see you there." Jason burst out laughing. "Oh my God," he said, wiping his eyes. "Mom, this is priceless. Maybe next time wear something that doesn't scream thrift store." The laughter around the table was softer this time. Uneasy, forced. I stood there, wine dripping from my hair, my clothes stained, my gift on the floor. No one offered a napkin. No one defended me. Not even Jason paused long enough to realize what he was doing. I looked at my grandson. Sammy wasn't laughing. He was staring at me, his face pale, his eyes wide, confused, ashamed. That hurt more than the wine, more than the mockery, more than the laughter. I bent down slowly, my knees protesting, and picked up the bond. I slipped it back into my purse. My hands were steady, my heart was not. "I think I'll head home," I said quietly. Jason waved a dismissive hand. "Suit yourself. But don't be dramatic about it. It's just a joke." A joke. I walked out without another word. I drove myself home that night in my old Chevy Impala, the one Jason calls an image problem. The city lights blurred as I crossed the bridge, but I didn't cry. Not yet. I felt something colder than sadness settle in my chest. Clarity. I raised Jason alone after his father died. I worked nights. I missed birthdays. I signed contracts with men who underestimated me and then paid the price for it. I built King Line Logistics from one leased truck into a regional operation employing over 1,000 people. I did it with discipline and patience. With values. When Jason finished business school, I brought him in. When he asked for more authority, I gave it. When he wanted control, I stepped aside. What I didn't realize was that I wasn't raising a leader. I was handing my legacy to someone who believed kindness was weakness, Over the past 5 years, my name slowly disappeared from press releases, from meetings, from decisions. Jason called me outdated. Valerie called me a burden. They told people I lived off Jason's generosity. They forgot one thing. Nothing they had was truly theirs. That night, back at my farmhouse in Vermont, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and washed the wine from my hair. I looked at my reflection older. Yes, but not broken. Not finished. I opened the floor safe I hadn't touched in years. Inside were documents that mattered, foundational agreements, trust structures, and a clause my attorney insisted on decades ago, a clause designed for ethical collapse. I made one phone call. "Sullivan," I said calmly, "it's time." He didn't ask why. I slept deeply that night for the first time in years. The next morning, while my son planned his day believing everything was secure, I began reclaiming what was always mine. Because when your own child laughs as you are humiliated, when love turns into spectacle, silence is no longer grace. It's surrender. And I was done surrendering. If you felt that in your bones, hit like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. You might not be alone. I left Boston before sunrise, when the streets were still quiet and the city hadn't yet decided what kind of day it was going to be. My hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale against the cracked leather. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that made your joints ache a little more than usual. I didn't mind. Pain was grounding. It reminded me I was still here. The ride to Vermont took just over 3 hours. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't play the radio. I drove in silence, letting the hum of the road fill the spaces where grief might have crept in. The farmhouse came into view just after 8. A modest, 2-story home tucked into the shoulder of a sloping hill, surrounded by maple trees and a rusting fence I'd never gotten around to fixing. It was the first thing I bought for myself after the company hit its first million. Jason was 10 back then, just like Sammy is now. He helped me plant tulips in the front yard and called it our secret hideout. He doesn't remember that. I unlocked the front door and stepped into the scent of cedar and thyme. Dust danced in the soft light pouring through the windows. The furniture was exactly where I left it, a faded plaid armchair, the wooden table with a scratch from Jason's toy car, a fireplace lined with blackened bricks. This house didn't change, even when everything else did. I set my purse down, kicked off my shoes, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. The quiet wasn't lonely. It was mine. After unpacking a few essentials, I went to the study, the smallest room in the house, but the one that held the most power. A bookshelf lined with old ledgers, binders labeled by year, and a locked drawer at the bottom of the desk. I knelt down, pulled up the rug, and lifted a loose floorboard. Beneath it was a small safe. I punched in the code, a 6-digit combination I hadn't used in nearly a decade but remembered as easily as my birthday. Inside were folders, some yellowed with age, others newly crisp. Among them, a red envelope marked Emergency Governance, King Line Holdings. I placed it on the desk and opened it carefully, as if the paper might shatter under the weight of what it meant. There it was, Clause 12C. The emergency control provision. It was a legal failsafe. Drafted over 20 years ago, it gave me, as founder and silent trustee, the power to override all executive decisions and freeze company assets in the event of gross ethical misconduct. At the time, it seemed overly cautious, but Sullivan had insisted. "One day, Margaret," he'd said, "you'll thank yourself for this." Today was that day. I reached for the landline on the desk, an old rotary phone that still worked, even when cell towers failed. I dialed Sullivan's direct number. He picked up on the second ring. "Margaret?" His voice was groggy but alert. "I'm activating the clause." A beat of silence. Then, "Are you sure?" He humiliated me in front of our family, called me stingy, cheap. Valerie poured wine on my head, and he laughed, like it was all theater. Another pause. Then, "I'll initiate the process immediately. I need your signature. In person. I'll drive down tomorrow. Be ready." After hanging up, I sat back in the armchair. The silence wrapped around me like an old shawl. I thought about everything I'd given Jason, my time, my money, my trust. I thought about the day he graduated from Harvard, the way he hugged me like he still believed I was his hero. Where had that boy gone? What replaced him? My eyes landed on a photograph above the mantel. Jason, at age 6, holding a paper crown, grinning through missing teeth. I'd taken that photo at a school play. He was a nervous, fidgety king in a cardboard robe. Afterward, he ran into my arms and said, "Did I do okay, Mama?" "You did more than okay," I wanted to say. "You were everything I dreamed of." Now I wasn't sure who he was anymore. Later that evening, I made myself tea Earl Grey with honey and walked out to the porch. The trees swayed gently, and the wind carried the scent of wet earth and wood smoke. This place was the beginning of everything. I had written my first business plan here, balanced budgets by candlelight, rocked Jason to sleep during thunderstorms. It had held me through every storm before this one. I didn't cry that night. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the tears wouldn't fix anything. They wouldn't undo the humiliation or soften the betrayal. They wouldn't teach Jason the lesson he needed to learn. Action would, and I was ready to act. Tomorrow, I would drive back to Boston not to beg, not to explain, but to take back what I built. Quietly, legally, completely. I stood up, emptied my teacup into the bushes, and whispered to the night sky, "You picked the wrong woman to bury, Jason." Then I turned out the porch light and went inside. I was on the road again before the sun cleared the mountaintops, this time heading toward Boston not with shame, but with purpose. The Impala, old and temperamental, groaned a little on the steeper curves of Route 2, but I didn't mind. The wind cut through the trees like a whisper, and for the first time in weeks, my thoughts were quiet. The city reappeared like a test I already knew the answers to. I parked 2 blocks away from Sullivan's office, not because I had to, but because I didn't want anyone to recognize my car. My name still carried weight in some circles, and I intended to move with as little noise as possible until the moment was right. Sullivan's firm was nestled in a gray stone building overlooking the common, discreet but elite. I had helped him pay the first month's rent there 30 years ago, when he was fresh out of law school and still called me Miss King. Now he greeted me at the door with a grim nod and a warm cup of black coffee, 2 sugars, just how I liked it. "You look sharp," he said, eyeing my blazer. "Serious." "I am," I replied, "and I'm not here to talk about feelings." "Good, because we're past feelings. We're into facts now." We stepped into his private office, where the blinds were drawn and the air smelled like cedar oil and ink. The folder I had brought from Vermont was already open on the table. He had pulled additional documents from storage financial statements, board records, archived agreements from the founding years. "We have a legal path," he said, flipping through the pages. "The trust clause gives you authority to freeze accounts if there's provable mismanagement or behavior that threatens the stability of King Line. Is public humiliation of the founder enough?" He looked at me over his glasses. "Combined with the rumors I've heard from employees about Jason cutting pensions and inflating executive bonuses?" "Yes." I nodded. "Then we begin." He slid over the paperwork. "You'll sign here, here, and here. Once filed, it'll initiate a 48-hour hold on the company's liquid accounts. Enough time for us to transfer assets into the protective fund we set up last year for Sammy. That fund. Another precaution Sullivan had helped me build, one Jason never knew existed, a contingency trust in my grandson's name, overseen entirely by me until he turned 21. "Jason can't touch this?" I asked. "Not unless he plans to sue a minor," Sullivan said. "And even then, he'd have to win." I signed every page slowly, pressing the pen with steady pressure, making sure each signature was bold and unmistakable. When I finished, I slid the last page towards Sullivan, exhaled, and said, "It's yours now." He leaned back, studying me. "You know this is war, Margaret." "No," I corrected. "This is preservation." He declared war the moment he laughed when Valerie poured wine on my head. He didn't argue. The next 2 hours were a flurry of secure calls, encrypted messages, and document filings. Sullivan coordinated with 2 private accountants, both loyal to me since the early days of the company. We issued a silent lockdown on 3 major accounts Jason used to fund operations. By the time he checked his email later that morning, the passwords would be changed and every wire transfer blocked. "Do you want me to notify the board?" Sullivan asked as he packed the last folder. "Not yet," I said. "Let him sweat." On my way out, I passed the receptionist, a young woman with wide, tired eyes. She looked at me the way people look at distant relatives they've only heard about in stories. Her face changed when she realized who I was. "You're..." "Miss King?" she asked quietly. I smiled. "Still am." In the elevator, I stared at my reflection in the chrome panel. Wrinkles at the corners of my eyes, streaks of gray at my temples, but my posture was straighter than it had been in years. The woman looking back at me wasn't just a mother. She was a founder, a builder, a woman who had finally remembered the full weight of her own name. I stepped out onto the street, the wind lifting the edge of my coat. I didn't head straight home. I walked past the glass tower where King Line now had its new headquarters. Sleek, cold. Jason had remodeled the whole thing last year, ripped out my old office, turned the break room into a barista lounge, image over substance. From across the street, I could see him through the window, talking into his phone with the kind of frantic energy that follows when the world stops behaving like you expect it to. His back was turned, shoulders tense. He didn't know yet, but he would soon. I turned and walked away before he could spot me. There was no reason to gloat. This wasn't revenge. This was balance. Justice doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it begins with a signature and a quiet goodbye. I headed back to Vermont that evening with a single thought in my mind. Jason could have had everything, but he chose arrogance. Now he'd learn what it cost to mock the hands that fed him. I didn't act out of fury. Anger fades. It burns hot and quick, and then it leaves you hollow. No, what pushed me to this point was something colder, something heavier, something far more permanent. It was disrespect. That's what stuck with me as I sat on my front porch in Vermont, staring out at the falling leaves. The air was turning, like it always did this time of year, and I pulled my shawl tighter around my shoulders. My tea had gone cold in my hands, but I didn't move to reheat it. I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was thinking about how long I had let myself be small, quiet, careful. Jason hadn't always been this way. When he was younger, he used to write me notes. Little things like, "Thanks for the ride, Mom," or "I love you more than chocolate." I kept those notes, still have them. They're folded up inside an old recipe box next to the flour jar in the kitchen. Every so often, when the house gets too quiet, I open that box just to remember that there was a time when love felt easy, before pride took its place. The disrespect didn't start all at once. It crept in slowly, like mold behind wallpaper. It began with eye rolls when I offered advice during meetings. Then came the "we'll take it from here" mom responses whenever I asked about company reports. Eventually, I stopped being invited to those meetings altogether. Still, I stayed silent. I told myself he was under pressure, that maybe he was just trying to assert independence. I wanted to believe he was growing into the role I had once envisioned for him. But deep down, I think I knew. I knew the first time he introduced me at a company gala as our original investor instead of the founder. I knew when he remodeled the corporate lobby and removed the mural of the first delivery truck I had driven across the state. A line in a snowstorm to deliver holiday packages on time. He called it old-fashioned branding. And I knew when he started referring to his wife as the woman who keeps this company running. Valerie never worked a day in logistics. Her version of work was choosing caterers for fundraising galas and picking paint colors for the executive lounge. The final insult wasn't even the party. It was what he said afterward. That night, after I left in silence, I checked my phone. One missed call, a voicemail, Jason's voice, slurred, not from drink, but from arrogance. "Hey, Mom, just wanted to say, lighten up, will you?" It was a joke. Sammy doesn't care about bonds. He wants real stuff like bikes and video games. Not whatever message you're trying to send. Times change. Maybe it's time you did too. He ended the message with a laugh. That same sharp, hollow laugh I'd heard 100 times in the last 5 years. I listened to it twice. The second time, I deleted it, because there it was. The truth. It had nothing to do with tradition, nothing to do with money. It was about power, about control, about a son who had decided that the woman who gave him everything was now a relic to be mocked, and that was what did it. I got up from my chair, walked into the study, and opened a dusty drawer I hadn't touched in years. Inside was a framed photograph from the early days of King Line me, in a hard hat, standing in front of the company's first warehouse, with a clipboard in one hand and a walkie-talkie in the other. Jason was in that photo too, 8 years old, sitting on a stack of pallets, holding a lunchbox and beaming like I was the greatest woman alive. That boy was gone. But I wasn't. I stood taller that night than I had in a long time. I made a list, names, timelines, passwords. I reviewed the fund structures we had just activated with Sullivan. Then I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I put on my steel-toed boots. Not literally, my knees wouldn't thank me, but mentally, I laced them up tight. Jason thought he could erase me, rewrite history, turn the company into his personal playground while feeding me platitudes about family. But he forgot something. I didn't build an empire to be pitied. I built it because I knew what it felt like to be overlooked, to be underestimated, and I swore I would never let anyone make me feel small again. Jason didn't just forget who I was. He forgot who made him. And now, I was going to remind him. Quietly, legally, permanently. I turned off the light, closed the drawer, and smiled not because I was happy, but because I was sure. When a woman stops needing to be understood, she becomes unstoppable. 2 days after the financial lockdown went into effect, the first call came. I was in the garden, clipping back the last of the summer hydrangeas, when the phone buzzed in my pocket. I didn't recognize the number, but I knew who it was. Jason never called from his personal line unless he wanted something. This was his assistant's number. I wiped my hands on my apron, let the phone buzz twice more, then picked up. Yes? Mom? His voice was clipped, forced calm, the kind of tone a man uses when he's smiling through gritted teeth. Hey, something's up with the accounts. I said nothing. I mean, we're locked out of 3 of our operating funds. That's payroll, vendor flow, freight insurance. It says it's restricted by you. What's going on? I stood still among the rows of faded flowers. The wind carried the scent of turned soil and old lilac. Have you checked the founding agreements lately? I asked. There was a beat of silence. I'm serious, Mom. We have invoices due. I have investors expecting transfers. I suggest you find your copy of the emergency governance clause, I said, my voice steady. And then call your attorney. His voice sharpened. Is this about the party? About a joke? No, Jason. It's about 5 years of treating me like an employee you can phase out. About dismissing every principle this company was built on. And about a clause you never bothered to read. You're making a mistake, he snapped. Possibly, but I'd rather make one on my terms than continue pretending yours aren't catastrophic. Click. I set the phone down on the porch railing and returned to my shears. Snipping the dried blooms gave me more satisfaction than I expected. Control didn't have to be loud. Sometimes, it was just quiet precision. Later that day, I received an email from Sullivan confirming that Jason had contacted a corporate lawyer. He was already trying to reverse the clause. Sullivan was confident he wouldn't succeed. His team wasn't even aware it existed, he wrote. They're scrambling. We've got the upper hand. I didn't gloat. I didn't smile. Because this wasn't the end. This was just the first crack. By that evening, I was back inside, going through old files again. Not just company documents, but family ones. Letters, photographs, school reports. I found a birthday card Jason had made for me when he was 12. It read, "To the strongest, smartest, coolest mom in the world. One day I'll have a company just like yours. I'll make you proud." The ink had faded, but the words still stung. Because somewhere between that promise and this moment, something went wrong. What happens to a boy who once adored his mother and grew into a man who laughs when she's shamed? The answer came to me as I flipped through our earliest company ledgers. He never truly respected the struggle. He inherited the reward, but not the sacrifice. That night, I began writing. Not just notes, a full document, a personal testimony of how the company was built, every decision, every loan, every sleepless night. Not for the board, not for the press, for Sammy. Someday, he would ask what happened, and I would not let Jason be the one to tell the story. I included the photos, the timelines, even the letter Jason wrote me as a child. I tucked it into the front cover. This wasn't war, it was legacy work. Because while Jason fought to protect his image, I was fighting to protect the truth. And truth is quieter, but it lasts longer. 3 days after the accounts were frozen, Jason held a staff meeting. He didn't know I had eyes in the building. Janice, a quiet woman from HR who had been with the company since year 4, called me from the parking garage afterward. She didn't speak right away. I could hear her breathing hard, as if she'd run all the way to her car just to tell me. "He's blaming you," she said, voice low and tight. "Said you're having episodes, that you're unstable, that this is some sort of emotional breakdown." I let the silence stretch. Then, "Did people believe him?" Janice sighed. "Some did. Others looked away. No one pushed back." I thanked her, told her to take the week off, full pay. Jason's strategy didn't surprise me. That was his version of damage control: lie, then discredit. If the money couldn't be reached, then the next best thing was to make the person holding the keys look unfit to carry them. I spent the rest of that morning calling in quiet favors. Journalists, retired board members, a retired VP from logistics who still lived 2 towns over and owed me more than a few dinners. I didn't leak anything. Not yet. But I lit enough matches that Jason would start to feel the heat. By the end of the day, whispers had reached my lawyer's office. People were asking if I was sick, if I'd lost my mind. One even asked if I was being manipulated by an advisor, as if I wasn't capable of making my own decisions after building the entire infrastructure they now ran. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was anxious, but because I was making a list. It started with every employee who had been fired in the last 2 years under Jason's new streamlining policy. Most were over 50. Many had been with me since the beginning. Next, I tracked down records of pension cuts, bonuses redistributed to upper management, and the infamous golf trip to Palm Springs billed as a logistics conference. I compiled it all into a binder, labeled it Motive and Means. If Jason wanted to claim I was mentally unstable, he'd have to do it while explaining how his own leadership choices were gutting the company from the inside out. The next morning, I took a walk through town. At the post office, an old friend stopped me. "Heard some noise from Boston," he said, eyes sharp. "If you need someone to remember how this place got started, just say the word." I thanked him. I walked home slowly, letting my boots scuff the sidewalk. People hadn't forgotten. They just hadn't been asked in a while. Back at the farmhouse, I checked my email. Jason had sent a message brief, clinical. "Please refrain from further action until our legal team resolves the matter. You're putting the company at risk. I am formally requesting a conversation privately before this escalates further." I read it twice, then deleted it. Because the moment he chose to lie about me in front of people I once mentored, he forfeited the right to privacy. He could either correct his lies publicly, or watch them unravel. Jason didn't show up in Vermont. He sent a lawyer instead. A young one, cocky, probably a rising star at some firm with polished furniture and zero memory of who I was or what I'd done. He knocked on my door at 9 a.m. Sharp, dressed like Wall Street, holding a manila folder like it contained the 10 Commandments. "Miss King," he said with a forced smile, "my name is Daniel Kraus. I'm here on behalf of your son to discuss an amicable resolution." I let him talk. He spoke of family unity, miscommunication, the long view of legacy. He used words like restructure, co-executive authority, and my personal favorite, public image integrity. He laid out a proposal that suggested I step down fully and permanently again, this time in exchange for a compassionate exit package, one-time payment, no further say in the company, no mention of the clause, no acknowledgement of wrongdoing. When he finished, he smiled like he'd just offered me the crown jewels. I slid the folder back across the table. "Daniel," I said slowly, "you've done nothing wrong. You're just doing your job. But your client has forgotten something very important." He raised an eyebrow. "I'm not asking for a seat at the table. I built the damn table." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You can tell Jason this. The only resolution I'm interested in is one where the company returns to the values it was founded on. And if that means burning it all down to rebuild it brick by brick, I have the matches." Daniel stood, stiff now. The script had run out. "I'll convey your message." "Please do." He left without finishing his coffee. That night, Jason called again. I didn't answer. He left a voicemail. This time, he didn't sound angry. He sounded tired. "Mom, this is getting out of hand. You've made your point. Let's talk. Just you and me. I'll fly up tomorrow if I have to." It was tempting for a moment. that trace of softness in his voice, that echo of the boy who used to fall asleep in my lap during winter storms. But I had seen that trick before. The performance of vulnerability, only to return to arrogance once the pressure lifted. I couldn't fall for it again. Instead, I drafted a letter to the board. It was brief. To the board of directors, I write to formally request an emergency meeting under the authority of Clause 12C. The purpose: to review and assess leadership ethics, operational stability, and recent executive decisions that threaten the financial and moral integrity of Kingline Logistics. I will present documentation. I request your attendance in person. Respectfully, Margaret E. King, founder. I sent it that night. Sullivan called 15 minutes later. "That's the move," he said. "They can't ignore you now." By the next morning, 4 board members had confirmed. Jason hadn't even seen it coming, because Jason thought the mirror was a window, that what he saw, his version, was everyone's reality. He forgot that some of us still knew how to clean the glass. The boardroom hadn't changed much. Same long walnut table, same leather chairs that creaked if you leaned too far back, same glass walls overlooking the skyline, as if a pretty view could soften hard decisions. The only thing different was the woman sitting at the head of the table. Me. It had been nearly 5 years since I'd last attended a board meeting. Back then, I'd worn navy pantsuits and a diplomatic smile. Back then, I still believed Jason needed room to lead without my shadow looming. Today, I wore gray, soft, grounded, and quiet like stone before the storm. The first person to arrive was Michelle Torres, our longest-serving board member. She'd been with us since we were operating out of a shared warehouse in Lowell. She gave me a small nod as she took her seat, no words. Just that look of someone who knew how hard this moment was, and was here anyway. The others filtered in slowly, 2 from out of state, 1 joined by video. Their greetings were cordial but cautious. Jason had painted me as unstable, but my calm presence in that chair already began to crack the illusion. Then Jason walked in. He didn't expect me to be early, or composed, or armed with 3 thick folders, 1 for each board member. His eyes narrowed. "Mother." I didn't rise. "Jason," I said, gesturing toward the empty chair across from me. "Have a seat." He did, reluctantly. He wore his confidence like armor, but I could see the strain in his jaw, the twitch in his right hand. He didn't expect this room to still belong to me. I opened the meeting. Clause 12C has been activated. Today's purpose is not to entertain personal grievances. It is to review a documented pattern of decisions and behaviors that I believe jeopardize the ethical foundation and financial future of Kingline Logistics. Jason let out a small scoff. "You mean decisions you didn't agree with?" I ignored him and distributed the folders. Inside, the pension cuts, the executive bonuses, the terminated long-term employees, the misappropriated travel expenses, the golf resort invoices, the pay gap reports, the missing supplier audits, all dated, all signed, all traced directly to his office. I didn't speak for 10 minutes. I let the pages speak for themselves. When I finally looked up, 2 of the board members weren't even reading anymore. They were watching Jason. He tried to spin it, of course. Talked about modernization, strategy, market expectations, but the numbers didn't lie. And neither did the resignation letters from loyal employees, many of whom had written personal notes explaining their disappointment in the company's new direction. Michelle closed her folder first. "I'd like to hear from Sullivan," she said. Jason's eyes flicked toward the door. Sullivan entered, briefcase in hand, and delivered a 10-minute legal summary confirming that Clause 12C gave me temporary authority during the investigation and that everything done so far had been within legal bounds. Jason finally snapped. "This is a coup," he shouted. "She's hijacking the company. I've doubled profits in 3 years, and she wants to drag us back to the dark ages." I looked him in the eye. "I want to bring us back to when employees weren't afraid to speak, when loyalty was valued, when your grandmother's stock dividends weren't sacrificed for a bigger office espresso machine." The room went silent. I could feel the moment shifting, the oxygen changing. Jason stood abruptly. "I won't sit here and be ambushed." "You already are," Michelle said flatly. "And you'd better start answering questions, or this might be your last time in this room." He froze, then sat back down. For the next hour, the board questioned him. I said little. I didn't need to. My work was done. As the meeting ended, I rose slowly, gathering my folders. "We built this company to last," I said. "Not to impress stockholders for a quarter. To serve real people. Remember that." I walked out first. Because today wasn't about reclaiming control. It was about restoring memory. The fallout didn't begin with a press release. It started with a lunch break. 3 days after the board meeting, someone in the warehouse posted a message in the break room. It was handwritten, taped to the old vending machine that never worked unless you hit it just right. It read, "To the founder who remembered our names, thank you." Below that, signatures began to appear. Forklift operators, dispatchers, janitors, drivers from 4 different regional routes. The sheet filled up, and someone taped another next to it. Then another. By Friday, there were 6 sheets and a framed photo of me in a hard hat, grinning beside an 18-wheeler. I hadn't stepped foot in that warehouse in years, but my presence was returning through whispers, through memories, through the small acts of loyalty Jason had long stopped earning. Janice called again. "There's talk of a walkout," she said. "Voluntary, just a day, symbolic." "No," I told her gently. "Not yet. Let the board do its job. But people want to show you they still believe in what you built." That night, I sat on the back porch with a glass of wine. It was dry and bitter, Sullivan's recommendation, and I sipped it slowly while watching the wind comb through the trees. Jason had spent years tightening control, rebranding, replacing, removing. But what he didn't understand was that culture isn't a logo. It's legacy. It's the stories people tell when the lights are off. It's the memory of a boss who showed up to funerals, who paid overtime in cash when the budget was tight, who asked about your mother's hip surgery and remembered your kid's name. Jason thought he could erase all that. But loyalty, once earned, doesn't vanish. It waits. By Monday, 3 board members requested individual meetings with me. Not Sullivan, not lawyers, just me. They wanted to hear the full story, how it started, what changed, and what I saw for the future. I met them at a small cafe near South Station. No suits, no notepads, just coffee and memory. I told them the truth, not just about Jason, but about myself. The years I got things wrong, the corners I cut, the debt I paid, the sleepless nights wondering if I could keep the company afloat. I told them how I once slept in the back of a delivery truck during a snowstorm because the heater at the warehouse failed and we had nowhere else to go. I didn't cry. I didn't dramatize. I just let them see me again. Not as a symbol, but as a woman who bled for the business they now governed. After that, things began to move. Jason tried to counter with his own narrative, hired a PR team, released a glossy video about legacy growth and visionary leadership. He smiled too much. His suit was too tight, his tone too polished. The video made rounds online. So did the photo of the break room tribute wall. One was sleek. The other was real. Guess which one people believed? By the end of the week, the board voted to initiate a formal ethics review. Jason would remain in position for now, but with reduced authority. All major decisions required a secondary signature. Mine. He called me that night. "You think you've won?" he asked, voice cracking. "I haven't won anything," I replied. "I've just reminded people who we are." He didn't respond. I waited, then said, "You were supposed to carry this forward, Jason, not rip it apart." He hung up. I didn't call back. Because sometimes, silence says more than disappointment ever could. The cottage at the lake had been mine long before Kingline was more than a dream. Nestled beneath pines and maples, it was where I went when I needed to think, to breathe, to remember that the world was bigger than balance sheets and boardrooms. It was also the one place Jason had never visited. Not once. He knew it existed, of course. I mentioned it over the years. But whenever I offered, he had a reason not to come. Too busy, too far, too rustic. So when I unlocked the front door that morning, I knew I'd be alone. I needed that. The air inside was cool and familiar, pine-scented. The furniture was old, but clean. A patchwork quilt I'd sewn decades ago still covered the armchair. The fireplace had the same iron tools beside it, slightly rusted with time. I made coffee, sat by the window, and opened my laptop. Jason wasn't out of the picture yet. His supporters were circling quietly. a few executives still loyal to his version of vision. They were floating the idea of restructuring the board, pushing me into a symbolic role again. They underestimated how fast loyalty moved when it had a heartbeat. I spent the day drafting letters, not to lawyers, to people, drivers, supervisors, technicians, staff from distribution centers in 4 states. I wrote one by one, personalizing each, thanking them for their years, asking for their stories, what King Line meant to them, what they wanted it to mean again. By the time the sun dropped below the trees, I had 20 replies. By midnight, I had 73. They weren't just messages. They were testimonies. I met my wife on the loading dock in 1997. Still married. 2 kids. Wouldn't be here without King Line. I was homeless when I got hired. You gave me a chance. Now I own a home. Frun Live exampled. I remember when you brought soup to the night shift during a snowstorm. That's the company I want back. I cried. Not out of sadness, but because I finally felt seen again. Not as a figurehead, not as mom, but as the woman who once carried this company on her back while raising a child who now didn't recognize the weight of her labor. The next morning, I received an envelope. Not by email, hand-delivered. Inside was a copy of a press release one Jason had prepared but hadn't published yet. It was an announcement, a peaceful leadership transition, stating that I had agreed to step down and serve as honorary founder in a purely ceremonial role. It praised my legacy, thanked me for my guidance, and welcomed the next generation of King Line leadership. The lies were polite, but still lies. He never sent it to the press. Yet. But sending it to me? That was a warning shot. Or maybe a dare. I placed the paper beside my coffee and stared out across the lake. Jason had played his next card. And now, it was my move. I picked up my pen, not to sign anything, to write a letter of my own. Not just to employees, to shareholders, to the public, to every person who once believed in what we built. Because this wasn't just about a company anymore. It was about truth. And truth, when written by the right hands, could still level giants. I wrote it by hand first, not because I'm old-fashioned, but because some things demand ink. Typed words can be edited, deleted, cleaned up, but handwritten words carry your pulse. My hands shook a little as I wrote the opening. This company was built with hands blistered from labor, not manicured by power. I wasn't writing to wound. I was writing to wake them up. The letter spanned 3 pages, simple, clear, not a word wasted. I detailed the history of King Line in human terms. I reminded them it began with a woman, a pickup truck, and a promise to never miss a delivery even if it meant driving through snowstorms with a baby strapped into the passenger seat. I named the years when profits were thin and employees stayed because they believed in something bigger than bonuses. I named the first employee we lost to cancer, the warehouse worker who saved a child's life during a fire, the janitor who retired after 40 years and was given a standing ovation. Then I explained what changed, not just under Jason but with a culture that began treating people as data points, that celebrated image over service, that punished loyalty with silence. I didn't mention Jason by name. Not once. But everyone knew. I ended the letter with a question. What kind of company do you want to tell your grandchildren you helped protect? The next morning, Sullivan had it printed in full-page ads in 3 major newspapers. By noon, it had gone viral. People posted screenshots, annotated quotes, added their own stories in the comments. Former employees tagged each other. Industry veterans reposted with captions like, "This is leadership, and we forgot what this felt like." Then came the reporters. Business Weekly. Forbes. Even a podcast host from a top logistics tech show asked for an interview. I turned them all down. Because this letter wasn't a performance, it was a mirror. Jason responded 2 days later on video. Slick, rehearsed, seated in his office with the company logo glowing behind him. He praised me, called the letter moving and a reminder of our roots. He promised renewed efforts toward inclusion and respect. He said nothing concrete, just floated words like values, legacy, and shared mission. But the damage was done, because no matter how smooth he looked, his eyes betrayed him. They shifted, flickered, looked past the camera instead of into it. People saw it. They compared. And when they did, they didn't choose him. They chose the woman who still remembered the name of the man who painted the original loading dock. At the next board meeting, the tone had shifted. No one questioned my authority. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. Jason didn't speak at all. That night, Janice called again. She whispered, "You just did what he never could." "What's that?" "Made them care again. When you shake a tree hard enough, things fall. Some expected, some not." 2 weeks after the letter, a low-level finance analyst named Aaron Becker contacted Sullivan. Barely 30, quiet, often overlooked in meetings, but Aaron had been watching the numbers. More importantly, he had been watching the patterns. He didn't come to us with vengeance. He came with spreadsheets. "There are discrepancies," he said, handing over a flash drive. "Transfers routed through third-party consultants, reimbursements that don't match the travel logs, vendor payouts that look inflated." We reviewed the data for hours. It wasn't just messy bookkeeping. It was embezzlement. And worse, it had Jason's signature on half the authorizations. At first, Sullivan wanted to keep it quiet. Confirm with external auditors. I agreed. We couldn't afford false accusations. But inside, I felt something I hadn't in months. Not triumph. Clarity. Jason hadn't just failed morally. He'd failed legally. A week later, the auditors confirmed it. Misappropriation of funds. Violation of fiduciary duties. Enough to trigger a mandatory ethics investigation under both company bylaws and state law. This wasn't just about who would lead Kingline. It was about whether Jason would even keep his freedom. The board called an emergency session. This time, Jason didn't show. He sent a statement through his lawyer blaming internal miscommunication, procedural gaps, oversight errors, but his fingerprints were everywhere. Too many dotted lines led straight to him. Some wanted to delay action. Caution. Diplomacy. I stood up. "I started this company with $2,000 and a promise," I said. "Not a single dime of that was stolen. If we excuse this, even indirectly, we teach everyone that values are negotiable. They're not." Michelle nodded. "It's time." The vote wasn't unanimous, but it was decisive. Jason was suspended indefinitely. An interim CEO would be appointed, not me. I didn't want the seat. I wanted the soul of the company back, not the title. That night, I sat by the fireplace in my Vermont home. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt tired. The kind of tired that comes not from fighting but from carrying something heavy for too long. Jason hadn't called. He didn't have to. The silence between us was its own verdict. I didn't want revenge. I wanted truth. I wanted to believe my son could still be the boy who once made me macaroni art that read, "Best Mom Ever," and in 24. But boys grow up, and some forget who packed their lunches while building empires from scratch. Still, justice had a name, and tonight, it bore mine. The office Jason once occupied sat silent. I hadn't stepped into that room in over 2 years, but now, with his suspension official and the interim CEO not yet appointed, the space was unoccupied formally, at least. Informally, it was still haunted. I entered alone. No fanfare, no cameras. Just me and the quiet hum of the building at dusk. The walls were still decorated with awards, Jason's face beaming beneath headlines like Youngest CEO in Logistics to hit $1B and Forbes Visionary Under 40, photos of industry galas, a framed letter from a senator congratulating him on transformational leadership, but there was no photo of his first truck delivery, no memento from the early years, not a single image of the warehouse crews or line managers who kept the whole machine moving, only him, only shine. I walked behind the desk and sat in the leather chair. The scent of expensive cologne still lingered in the air. The screensaver on the computer was a rotating slideshow of Jason on stages, smiling, shaking hands, posing beside private jets. I closed my eyes, and I remembered a different room, an old break room in Lowell. Folding chairs, a fridge with a missing handle. Me and the original team eating pizza after a 20-hour shipping run, laughing so hard we cried. No titles, no hierarchy, just a shared exhaustion and pride. I stood and opened the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside were documents, contracts, reports, and surprisingly, a photo album. It was buried beneath newer folders, as if forgotten. I opened it. Inside were pictures I hadn't seen in years, Jason at age 7 sitting in a delivery truck, Jason helping pack boxes at 12. A rare shot of me hugging him after his high school graduation, both of us beaming. Then letters. Old ones I had written him. Birthday cards. Notes I'd left in his lunchbox. He'd kept them. He'd hidden them. I sat down slowly. Because the realization was sharper than any betrayal. He hadn't erased me entirely. He'd just buried me. Out of sight, but not out of memory. My phone buzzed. It was Sullivan. "We're ready to announce the interim CEO," he said. "And the board wants your blessing before the press release." I smiled faintly. "Who is it?" "Michelle. If you agree." I closed the album. "I do. She remembers what matters." As I left Jason's office, I paused at the door. For a moment, I wanted to lock it, to seal it as a monument to what happens when ambition forgets its roots. But I didn't. I left the door ajar, because maybe, one day, Jason would walk through it again, not to reclaim power, but to find the pieces of the man he used to be. And maybe he'd remember that once, he was proud to be his mother's son. Michelle's first week as interim CEO was quiet. She didn't rush in with mandates or speeches. She walked the floor, sat in on logistics calls, ate in the break room. She asked names, remembered them. When someone told her a story about the old days, she listened not politely, but with the kind of attention that says, "I was there too." The tone shifted almost overnight. Not just relief, but recognition. Employees began smiling again. Jokes returned to the break room. The air stopped carrying the weight of walking on eggshells. I stayed mostly in Vermont, watching from a respectful distance. This wasn't my stage anymore. I had lit the path. It was Michelle's turn to carry the torch. But I did attend one event, the quarterly town hall. Held in the main auditorium, it was a long-standing tradition I'd started decades ago. A chance for employees at every level to hear updates, ask questions, raise concerns. Under Jason, it had become a slideshow parade of numbers and buzzwords. Under Michelle, it was real again. The room was packed. She spoke plainly, spoke about rebuilding culture, restoring trust, strengthening the foundation, not just the profits. She mentioned me once, briefly, thanking our founder for reminding them what Kingline truly stood for. When she invited questions, a hand rose in the back row. Jason. I hadn't seen him in person since his suspension. He wore a muted gray suit, no tie. He looked older, thinner, humbled, but still trying to wear his pride like a shield. Michelle looked at him. "Go ahead." He stood. "I'd like to make a statement," he said. "If that's allowed." She nodded. "Of course." Jason cleared his throat. "I failed this company," he began. "Not because I didn't work hard, I did. Not because I didn't want it to grow, I did. But because somewhere along the line, I believed growth mattered more than people. I believed the numbers could speak for themselves, even when voices were being silenced." He paused, eyes scanning the room. "I forgot who built this place. I forgot what it meant to those who showed up long before I ever sat at that desk. I lost sight of the values that made it worth inheriting in the first place." A rustle of surprise passed through the audience. Jason continued, "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't ask for a second chance. But I do want to say this. I remember now, and I'll carry that, whether I'm in this building or not." Silence. Then, slowly, someone clapped. Then another, and another. It wasn't thunderous, but it was real. Jason nodded once, then walked out of the room without waiting for a response. I watched him go. He didn't look back. I didn't follow. Because redemption doesn't come with applause. It comes when a man stands in a room full of people he once overlooked and tells the truth not for their sake, but for his own. And that, finally, was a beginning. It was the first spring in a long time I didn't feel exhausted. The air in Vermont had softened. The snow had melted, revealing wildflowers stubbornly pushing through the thaw. I sat on the porch with a mug of chamomile, watching two squirrels chase each other across the railing, like the world hadn't just shifted under our feet. My phone buzzed. A message from Michelle. Board voted unanimously to restore full benefits to all laid-off employees from Jason's restructuring. "You started something real. Thought you should know." I smiled. Not for victory, for restoration. These days, I spent my time reading more than speaking. I answered letters from former employees, now retired, who shared how the company had changed their lives. I received photos of weddings, grandkids, homes purchased with overtime pay. Little tokens of what it meant when a job wasn't just a paycheck, but a piece of someone's dignity. But what surprised me most was the letter from Jason. It arrived by post, handwritten. "Mom," it began. "I don't know what I thought I was doing or who I thought I had to become to prove I was worthy of your legacy. Maybe I thought if I made the company bigger, I'd finally feel as strong as you. But instead, I made it hollow." That quote, Offrin 70's intenturist. He wrote about the board meetings he used to dread, the people he'd ignored, the decisions that kept him up at night but that he'd justified in the name of growth. He wrote that he was in therapy, that he was volunteering at a local shelter, that he didn't expect anything from me, just wanted to say he saw it now. All of it. At the end, he said, "You didn't just save the company. You saved me from becoming someone I would have hated." I folded the letter slowly, laid it on the table beside the old photo album. No tears, just stillness. Because the truth is, we don't always get the apology we deserve. But when it comes not perfectly, not completely, but honestly, it does something profound. It doesn't erase the damage, but it stops the bleeding. The next week, the board held a ceremony. Not public, just internal. They called it the Founders' Tribute. I didn't ask for it, didn't want it, but I went, not to be honored. To honor them for choosing memory over momentum. There was a plaque, flowers, a few kind speeches. But the only moment that stayed with me was when the new warehouse manager, a woman named Callie, hugged me tightly and whispered, "You gave us back our name. Not the brand, the family." That night, I sat by the lake, watching the moon ripple across the water, and I thought, this is enough. Not revenge, not control. Just the quiet peace of knowing I left something better than I found it. One morning, I woke up before the sun. The house was quiet, but something stirred in me, a restlessness I hadn't felt in years. I brewed a pot of strong black coffee, wrapped myself in my old wool cardigan, and stepped out onto the porch. The lake shimmered under the first light. I remembered when Jason was 7 and caught his first fish here. He screamed so loud I thought he'd hooked a shark. He didn't want to touch it, but he told everyone in town he wrestled it out with his bare hands. That boy, I still missed. I never stopped loving my son, even when I hated what he did. But life, I'd learned, didn't move in circles. It spiraled sometimes, bringing you back to what looked like the same place, only now you were someone else. Later that week, a package arrived. From Jason. Inside, a framed copy of the very first delivery invoice from Kingline. Dated, signed, yellowed with time. Tucked in the corner was a note. "Thought you should have this back. I'm starting over. Smaller company. Different name, but I promise same values this time." It wasn't grand, but it was honest. And it reminded me of something my own mother once told me, long before any business ever existed. The world doesn't need you to be perfect. It needs you to remember who you are when it's hard. That weekend, Michelle invited me back for a visit, not formal, just a lunch with the warehouse crew. I agreed. When I arrived, they'd set up a long table behind the building, under string lights, and the old water tower that still bore the faded initials, KL. Someone grilled burgers, someone brought peach cobbler. No press, no speeches, just stories, laughter. Hands that once built pallets now pouring sweet tea. And in that moment, I saw it. Not the company we built, but the why behind it. Not efficiency, not growth, but connection. And I realized the greatest legacy I would ever leave behind had nothing to do with trucks or shipments. It was this, a reminder, passed down quietly, that doing the right thing might be slower, messier, and lonelier, but it's always worth it. I never imagined I'd be back in the old Lowell office. Not as an employee, not as a leader, just as a guest. Michelle had converted my first office tiny, once filled with boxes and stress, into a quiet room for staff reflection. A place where anyone could sit, unplug, breathe. They called it the Founders' Room, though I asked them not to. She insisted. So I came. Quietly. Alone. I walked the halls like a stranger revisiting a childhood home. The coffee machines were sleeker now. The lobby smelled like eucalyptus instead of shipping oil. But the soul was still here. I stepped into the little room. The window still looked out over the loading dock. and the old wooden chair Michelle had found it in storage, cleaned it, repainted it, white with blue cushions now. She said it reminded her of something you'd find on a porch in Vermont. I sat, and I listened. I could still hear the echo of warehouse laughter through the walls, the sound of trucks backing in, radios squawking. Even if the room was quiet, the memories buzzed. And then I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not relief, not triumph. Peace. Because somewhere between the years of grit and the storm of betrayal, I had become more than just a builder of businesses. I had become someone who chose to return, to repair, to forgive. The world doesn't reward that loudly, but life does. Before I left, I took out a small envelope. Inside was a key, a backup to the Vermont cottage. I taped it under the drawer of the desk with a note, for the one who needs quiet to remember what matters. No signature. I didn't need one. The real signature was in every heartbeat that passed through those walls with integrity. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lot. As I walked away, I didn't feel like I was leaving anything behind. I had already passed it forward. A year had passed, 12 months since the letter, since Jason's downfall, since the company found its compass again, since I found mine. Life was slower now. Not small, just intentional. I volunteered twice a week at the library, taught a workshop on small business ethics at the local community college, planted a garden that never quite bloomed right, but I loved it anyway. Jason visited once. He didn't stay long. Just a weekend. We didn't talk about the company. We cooked together, walked by the lake. He chopped wood badly, then laughed about it, like he used to when he was 10 and couldn't tie his shoes. He hugged me tightly when he left. "Thanks for letting me come back," he said. I didn't say, "You're always welcome." I just said, "Drive safe." He understood. Some words are best left unsaid when they've already been proven. That summer, Michelle formally became CEO. No interim, no asterisks. She hosted a celebration at the Lowell warehouse, invited the founding team, even those retired. They gave me a bench with my name carved into it, facing the shipping bay. I cried. Not the shaking kind, the quiet kind, the kind that says, it was worth it. It still places all to stand. In the fall, I got a letter from a young woman named Leah. She worked in the Charlotte branch, had read my story, said it inspired her to start her own logistics company, focused on fair wages and second-chance hiring. She called it Open Road Logistics. At the bottom of the letter, she wrote, "P.S. My mom used to work for King Line. Said you once gave her a ride home in the rain. She never forgot it." I folded the letter and placed it next to Jason's, in the same drawer. Then, one morning, I drove. No reason, no appointment, just a long stretch of highway and a familiar playlist humming through the speakers. The road curved gently, like it remembered me. Maybe it did. Because some roads don't just lead us places. They carry the weight of who we've been. And if we're lucky, if we listen close, they whisper our name, not for where we're going, but for how far we've come. This story reminds us that integrity doesn't age, and dignity isn't something you retire from. In a world chasing numbers and noise, it's the quiet acts of truth, sacrifice, and memory that shape real legacies. No matter how far we drift, whether as children, leaders, or human beings, there's always a road back to who we were meant to be. Redemption is not about reclaiming power, but about rediscovering purpose and choosing what's right even when no one is watching.